For the debate, I recognize the member from Orléans.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's great to finally be back here in the legislature after our 5-month hiatus. And it's great to be debating something as important as safer roads and communities. I think, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, as we've heard throughout the afternoon already, is that while the bill purports to be tough on crime and purports to take measures that will make our roads and communities safer, it unfortunately doesn't live up to the name or live up to some of the rhetoric. It tries to make it sound like the government is going to do something about the stolen vehicle epidemic in Ontario, but I don't think it will have much of an impact. It says that it's going to do something about drinking and driving, but I'm not sure that the consequences or the change in consequences that are in the bill will in and of themselves do much to change drinking and driving. Now let's take for a second the stolen vehicle elements. If you're someone who steals a car, you're already someone who is open to breaking the law. If you go to jail as a result of that offense and you come out, we hope that you've been rehabilitated and you will no longer want to break the law. Part of that is being able to go out and get a job so that you can earn a living and take care of yourself and maybe take care of your family. That is obviously exceedingly difficult to do in our society if you're not allowed to drive a car. And so they're setting those people up for failure from the start to either re-enter illegitimate ways of making money, like stealing cars in the first place, or potentially, Madam Speaker, driving without a driver's license. Obviously, if you drive without a driver's license, you don't have insurance, and that doesn't make our communities or our roads safer. In fact, I would argue that that can make our roads less safe, because in the event of an accident, you don't have insurance. Obviously, the consequences of that can be profound for yourself and for those who you may injure or harm as part of that accident. So the government wanted to get tough on stolen vehicles. It would give police agencies the resources they need in order to get tough on stolen vehicles, in order to stop those vehicles from being stolen in the first place. We now have a minister responsible for stolen vehicles. Perhaps he could work with the auto industry to make those vehicles less easy to steal. I don't know why if pushing the button to start the car is what makes these things so easy to steal, I don't know that that's worth the convenience of not having to turn the key. I'm sure everyone here is old enough to remember turning the key. And I don't think that was all that inconvenient. And so we now have a minister responsible for stolen vehicles, and he should be occupying himself with making them less easy to steal in the first place. Now, in terms of the changes as it relates to drinking and driving, again, it sounds like they're getting tougher consequences for those who commit that offense. But those consequences only come into play if the conviction actually happens. If prosecutors are told to plead those down to dangerous driving or some other non-criminal consequence, then those tougher consequences can never actually be applied. And so someone will have gone through the process of being arrested, I'm sure the embarrassment and the emotional trauma of having to end up, taking months through that process to end up getting the equivalent of a ticket or a fine, which could have been done at the front end if we had in Ontario a process similar to what they have in British Columbia and in Alberta. And so it doesn't feel to me like it's actually making the resource problem any better, because the resources are still being used. The police officer is still taking them to the police station to get the secondary test. You're still occupying court time by having it on in the process for however many weeks or months it takes in order to get there. And then you're just pleading it down to the same offense that could have been done on the roadside if we had the same program or the same process they have in British Columbia and in Alberta. And again, Madam Speaker, why do we think that people will simply stop driving if they don't have a driver's license? These people have demonstrated and indicated already through their existing actions that obeying the law isn't perhaps their top concern. And so if they're needing to drive to take their kids to school or to go to work, any number of things, I think we would all find it very difficult in this room not to be able to drive, to take care of the day-to-day issues in our lives. People are going to drive, they're just going to drive illegally by driving without a driver's license and without insurance. And that, I don't think, makes our communities or our roads any safer. So there are ways to combat some of these issues, Madam Speaker, beyond simply making the consequences tougher. But there are other ways that we can make our roads and communities safer, ways that the government is choosing, at least in this bill, not to put forward. And I'd like to talk about some of those for a moment. We've heard about stunt driving. The police can't be everywhere all the time. We know that. They do a great job, but they can't be everywhere all the time. But something that, at least in my community, I could tell you the 2 or 3 or 4 streets, the main drags where the stunt driving, the racing happens on Friday night, on Saturday night. The police know what those are too, but they can't be there all the time. What can be there all the time, though, is photo radar. But, Madam Speaker, photo radar has very specific points in where it can be installed. It has to be installed near parks and schools or in community safety zones. Many of these main drags where you have street racing aren't going past parks or schools and therefore aren't in community safety zones. So we can give municipalities the tools to install photo radar in some of these well-known drag racing areas so they can actually help combat the epidemic of street racing. I think that's even a regulatory change. I'm not even sure we need a bill to do that. That's something the government could do pretty quickly. And even if it was a bill, I'm pretty sure it would probably have unanimous consent to try to crack down on some of this stuff, Madam Speaker. The government could invest in giving municipalities more of these funding for more of these tools, whether it's photo radar or red light cameras or license plate detection technology for police vehicles, or something that was tried in the City of Ottawa. A major concern, especially in the fall as we're getting back to school, is school buses are back on the road after 2 months off. We're back here after 5 months off. School buses are only off the road for 2 months, and people fall out of practice of seeing school buses on the road. And what happens is you see a spike in people going around the stop signs. That obviously is very dangerous. It puts our kids at risk. It's dangerous in our communities because school buses are more often than not on very localized community roads. That's where they're generally picking kids up. And so we're putting these neighborhoods and our communities at risk. Well, a solution there could be something that was done in Ottawa, which was to put video cameras on the school buses. And it's basically a school bus photo radar, but for the stop sign. This has been highly successful in the City of Ottawa, but it's very expensive. We know the cost challenges that school bus providers are already facing as a result of underfunding. But they could, or the municipality could, on their behalf, install these cameras on all buses or on more buses with some financial help from this government. That's help that they could provide today. It's help they could provide tomorrow. It's help to do this kind of thing the government could provide in the economic statement we know is coming in the next couple of weeks. Now, that is an investment that would actually make our streets and our communities safer, and it's an investment that I think everyone in this legislature would applaud. And so while this legislation purports to want to be tough on crime, it's not clear to me that it will actually live up to that hype, Madam Speaker. And in fairness, there is so much more the government could be doing to try to make our streets and our communities safer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the member from Scarborough.
Madam Speaker, to the member from Orleans, thank you for your presentation on the legislation. And my question is going to be around road safety. I hear it loud and clear, and you've also given some options that truly make sense. And so, do you think this legislation is moving fast enough, or do you think there is enough in this legislation when it comes to holding?
Okay. I apologize to the member, but I thought that time was being shared, and we're now moving on to questions. Questions? Yep. Questions? Okay. Questions? I recognize the member from Brampton East.
Speaker, I've been listening to the member's comments on the bill, and through you, Speaker, I wanted to ask the member his thoughts. Well, we already heard his thoughts on our license suspension for convicted criminals. My question is very simple. Do you support making life harder for convicted criminals that are robbing people of their time, their peace, their moral compass? Do you support making life harder for those convicted criminals or not? Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Response.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Certainly, I think that convicted criminals should face tough punishments. What I don't support is a government that doesn't actually want to convict criminals. You can't convict criminals if you tell your prosecutors not to prosecute them for the crime. If you tell them to plead the crime down to a fine, then they're not going to have a criminal record. And so you can't get tough on criminals that don't exist because you fail to prosecute them.
Thank you. Next question, the member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much. And Speaker, my question to the member was further to what he was just answering of the government members. We've been hearing today in the government remarks about being tough on crime, about convictions. But I guess my question to the member is, what happens if we're not seeing those convictions? If the government doesn't prioritize making that change in policy that had been enacted during COVID to deal with the backlogs, but has not yet been removed from the books and continues to still be government policy. If you can't get that out of the way, then we won't get convictions. We won't ever get to that stage. So perhaps you could share with us why on earth the government would talk about it being a priority without actually making the policy change. Thank you.
Thank you. Response.
Thank you very much. Well, we know that this government likes to write checks with its mouth that its policy implementation simply can't cash. And this is just another example of that. They want to get tough. They want to be seen to be getting tough. But in their day-to-day practice, they let things slide. That may have been a good approach during COVID in order to help whatever was going on. I'm not going to get into the details of their COVID flip-flops and their mistakes that they made during the COVID pandemic. But I think we can all agree now that if we're going to make someone go through that months-long process of being arrested, hiring a lawyer, go to court, and that entire process, we shouldn't then have it plead down at the last minute. We should actually try to convict them of the crime that they've been arrested for.
Thank you. I'm going to caution the member from Orléans with regards to his language. Now I recognize the member from Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is around road and safety. To the member from Orleans, I think about young people for second and third offense. And so my question is very simple to you. Do you think this legislation is taking enough action? Is it moving faster enough? Does it have a quick approach to hold those young drivers accountable for their first, second, and third offense?
Thank you. Response.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think a better approach would be giving police officers and police forces across the province and municipalities across the province the resources to actually catch more people in the act of breaking some of these rules. Whether it's updates to where and how photo radar is installed, whether it's the financing to municipalities or to school bus companies to put the video evidence capture technology and software onto school buses so we can find people who bypass the stop sign. There are financial investments that this government can make. It can open up its checkbook and give the police and municipalities the resources to actually catch more people in the act. And hopefully, if you get that $300, $400, $500, $600 fine for stunt racing or other traffic violations, that will be part of the process to change your behavior.
Thank you. The member from Orléans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for your presentation today, and to the Minister before. Both you and he indicated that your government is taking driving under the influence or impaired driving very seriously. And so, given that statement, I'm wondering if your government is still offering plea deals to drunk drivers to get off the potential of getting a criminal record and only having a Highway Traffic Act fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Response?
Anyone who's caught impaired driving will lose a license privilege for a time, and they will have to put the ignition lock to be able to drive. Anyone who ends up killing someone and they were impaired driving will lose the license permanently. We are not taking it lightly, and we're going tough on crime and tough on criminals, including criminals who choose to get behind the wheel impaired, whether it's through alcohol or drugs. We're doing the same thing with stunt drivers, and we're making sure that our streets stay safe, not just for us, but for generations to come, for our children as well as for us, because as you mentioned from my colleague there, our parents worry just the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Orléans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate what the government is proposing to do upon a conviction. In order to get a conviction, the Crown Prosecutor actually has to prosecute. And at the moment, the government's direction of prosecutors is to try to plead down to a Highway Traffic Act offense. And so if the government is telling prosecutors to plead down, how will anyone actually get convicted and face these tougher penalties?
Response?
Thank you, Speaker. As I mentioned, anyone convicted of impaired driving will have tougher penalties. They will have to install ignition lock. Anyone who causes death while impaired driving will lose a driving privilege for life.
Response?
There's harsher penalties the second time around, lifetime ban the third time around, and it's not just limited to impaired driving. It extends to stunt driving. It extends to anything that makes our roads unsafe.
Thank you very much. For the debate.